let's start. All right, now this session is called The Problem of Child Sacrifice Regulations and How to Do Justly. So, how is the pro-life movement opposing abortion? We have the strategy we can see in the laws that they have sought to pass. In their legislation, we see that there are sanitary standards that they're trying to hold the abortion mills up to, that they have to have the ability to wash, they have to have wider halls, they have to have brighter lights so they can see better, they have to have waiting periods. We have them saying you have to wait for 72 hours or 24 hours before you can have the abortion. You have to have an abortionist who has a medical license. You need to have parental consent for minors. You need to have ultrasounds done and the mother given the opportunity to look at those ultrasounds. You need to have a mandatory informed consent so that people are notified that they can go to a website and see what the state is saying about the development of their child or about the dangers of abortion to themselves. All of those kinds of things that they're mandatory. You have to let them know about this so they can be informed about what they're doing. You have bans on methods such as partial birth abortion bans, of pulling the baby partly out and killing the baby that way, or killing the child with forceps. So just a few years ago in Oklahoma, there was a law that was passed that said you can't kill a child with forceps by tearing them apart. But you could kill the child in another way, like with poison, and then take the child apart with forceps, but you couldn't kill them with forceps. And so it's just a ban on certain methods or procedures. You have to have an abortion mill within a certain distance of a hospital where the abortionist has privileges. You need to have, they might do a 20-week ban or a ban on the child after a heartbeat is discerned. A ban on discretionary abortions, like saying, well, we don't want to have this baby because this baby is a girl, and so we're going to have an abortion because we really want a boy this time. Or we're not going to have this abortion because the baby has Down syndrome. And so for those kinds of saying, well, you can't do it for those reasons. There's the strategy right now, very popular, people are talking about defunding Planned Parenthood. And a big deal is made by the pro-life movement is that many of these things are educational for the public. They're informing the public that abortion is painful, that the baby has a heartbeat at this time, and all of these different things trying to work and educate the culture. But what is the problem? The problem is that we are talking about the mass murder of the most vulnerable victims in our society. And these laws are not affecting justice for the child. They're not establishing equity and equal protection under the law. Would we say that these are good ideas for any other humans? Would we say that, hey, well, you should show a picture of a victim who's walking down the alley to the mugger before he can mug them to show, yes, this is a human, and so we're going to give you the opportunity to look at them before you attack them. That does not compute. It is not reasonable or righteous to make those kinds of laws. It's regulating child sacrifice as if it is not murder, as if it is health care, because these pro-life laws are regulating murder, about who can murder, about when they can murder. Well, you can murder after you thought about it for 24 hours, or you can murder if the child is younger than 20 weeks old. Why they can murder? So that the one state said, well, you can't murder for the reason of killing a child because they have Down syndrome. But that didn't necessarily save any Down syndrome children because the parents just don't say why they're killing the baby. They can say, well, it's because it's Tuesday, and so I decided to have an abortion. So that didn't necessarily save any lives. So they can say, well, why you're murdering, or they can tell people where they can murder if it's within a certain area between a hospital, and how they can murder under color of law, rather than engaging for the abolition of that murder under law. This is not seeking justice. It's not establishing equity. You see, almost 400 pro-life laws have passed federally or on the state level in our country in the past 7 years. 50 of them just last year in 2017. 50 laws in the last year, over almost 400 in the past 7 years, and not one of them calls abortion murder or treats it like murder. You see, the problem we find is that the pro-abortion crowd is calling abortion health care. The pro-life crowd, the movement as a whole, is treating abortion like health care. There are problems with regulating it this way. And one of those problems is that it's not treating it like what it is. You see, though seemingly pragmatic of saying, oh, we can get a victory this, we can save some lives this way, or we can just push our agenda a little bit more, it's actually a false victory. And so we're saying, no, let's obey God and trust Him to do what is right, and let us not do wrong in the midst of that. So first of all, the problems with regulating is, number one, entrenchment. You see, when you say, children are alive from conception, but we will allow you to kill babies until they can feel pain, because we're recognizing that you've been given that ability by the Supreme Court or whatever, and saying, well, so that entrenches the people's idea that it's a right they have. It legitimizes murder as a constitutional right in the minds of the public, making room for the evil. Would we do that for another evil? What if the Supreme Court opined that it was constitutional for clients to take children to certain licensed businesses to commit sexual assault upon them? Should we enact regulations and say, no, not after 3 years of age, because before that they might not remember it, but afterwards they would definitely have trauma, so let's just make a law saying not after that? Or would we say, well, they can only do it if the facility is clean and the attacker's health is insured? What if only if their father was a criminal? That's what we've been doing with abortion for about 35 years. We were saying, well, you can only kill your baby if the father was a rapist. Those kinds of exceptions. That is what we're doing. We're entrenching in people's minds the idea that this is a right that they can do, and we're just curbing it and regulating it. Secondly, it dehumanizes the children that are not protected. So entrenchment and dehumanization. What are we communicating to the populace when we say, you can't kill a baby after their heart is beating? What does that tell them? It's okay to kill the baby before the heart is beating. So that at the abortion mill, we might have someone come up, and I've heard people myself, my baby doesn't have a heartbeat, so I can kill the child because it's earlier. And yet we know that from the moment of conception, that child is a human being all the way up through the time that you cannot detect a heartbeat. Or they'll say, my baby can't feel pain yet. Where did they learn these things? They learned them from the pro-life movement and the legislation that the pro-life movement has pushed. We also see not only that we're entrenching the evil in the minds of the people and dehumanizing the children that we're professing to care about, but it's actually also inconsistency. It undermines the truth that these innocents are humans, are people, and that abortion is murder. People see through the hypocrisy. If I say, these children are alive from conception, and yet I'm going to allow you to kill them if they are a certain age still, then what does that tell you? That tells our society that we really don't think it's as murder when it's before that. When we say a human is a human from conception, but we're not going to prosecute their murder like we will for those who are older, or as we will demand it for ourselves. So it's being inconsistent. It's actually ageism. It's human rights hypocrisy on our part if we are calling for that. It is partiality, and it's inconsistent. Okay, so we come to the point where if we look at abortion like a tree, and we say, okay, how should we deal with this tree of abortion? And there's all various types of abortion. There's different branches, chemical abortions, surgical abortions. And we look at this and we say the pro-life movement has been trimming off branches, pruning this tree, and saying, hey, we got a victory. We don't allow partial birth abortion anymore. And so that's a victory everybody cheers about, but it hasn't stopped the tree from bearing fruit. It hasn't stopped it. In fact, that can actually make a tree, if you prune, that actually can make a tree more efficient. It can strengthen the tree and produce more fruit. That's one reason why Jesus was talking about, here are the branches, and if you bring forth fruit, he will purge those branches that they bring more fruit. I don't know anybody who grows fruit trees who prunes a tree in order to kill it. I don't know anyone who does that or limit the fruit, because it actually directs the tree, directs the growth of it, and makes it more efficient and fruitful. The pro-life movement has been faithfully pruning the abortion tree. And so we say, hey, we're limiting this and limiting that. And even abortion mills that are closing down so that there aren't as many freestanding abortion mills. And we're saying, this is celebratory. This is victory. But we're killing babies even earlier now. So that you can buy abortion at Walgreens or CVS or Walmart all across the country. And those numbers are impossible to track. We don't know how many babies have been murdered that way. And so we find that as abolitionists, we're saying we need to put down the shears. We need to take up the axe and take the axe, put the axe to the root. We need to stop regulating child sacrifice, as my shirt says. Stop regulating child sacrifice. Now, when we say, okay, we need to stop making these laws that are actually entrenching the evil in our society's mind. We need to stop regulating child sacrifice and stop treating it like health care and actually make bills of abolition that will say this is murder and we're not going to allow it in our culture. We're going to prosecute it as murder. We find that some people have become offended at this dramatic stance. And one reason is because if they were to admit that is the right thing, then that would mean that they've been doing it wrong all this time. And it's hard to admit when you've done it wrong. I thought that was okay for a long time until God brought me to repentance about that. And so, because some people, when we're looking out and say, well, doesn't it save some people? And so when we're calling out that it's wrong, it's not just to say that abortion mills must be clean, must have wider halls. It's unjust to say that those places of murder should be safe for the people who are paying to have the victim killed. Murder shouldn't be safe. We shouldn't make laws to say, well, people who are attacking people in alleys really are endangering themselves because they might stub their toe on a trash can. So we need to clean out all the trash cans, put special LED lighting in the alley, and prep everything so that when that person goes in to attack the other person, he doesn't get hurt. That would be illogical, but that's what we're doing. We're going in there, and those safety standards, they're not to keep the baby safe. They're to treat it like healthcare and ensure the safety of the people who are actually pursuing the murder of the child and of the safety of the staff at the mill. And so when we're saying that, hey, there's something wrong here, this is an arbitrary age, you've said, okay, well, at this point, we're not going to protect this child before that. See, but they'll say, the reason why you all are against regulating abortion, you're against the incremental treatment of it, they'll say, because you don't think it's enough. And I would say, I am not against the regulating of abortion because it's not enough. Because you say it's just not enough. That's not. I'm against it because it's not just. It's not that it's not enough. It's just not just. It's not righteous. These incremental and regulatory treatments of the Holocaust failed to establish equity for the preborn. What if we had said, hey, let's get a pro-Jew movement and say, we're going to put forth legislation to say that you have to think about it for 24 hours before you put a Jew into the chamber. Would that be just? Would we look back at history and say, that was wimpy? That was not right? Would we say you have to let the adults go and just kill the children? No. We would never countenance that. And yet, for our own evil in this day, that's what we're doing. So we're against it because it's not just. It's actually the writing of iniquitous decrees. Isaiah 10:1 says, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, that write grievousness which they have prescribed. And what we're doing in our society, the pro-life movement, is writing grievousness, things that are grievous to the God of creation, and then we're asking God to bless what we're doing. And so the abolitionists have said, no, that's wrong. I'm turning from that. You see, Isaiah 1:6 describes the people in Israel from the sole of the head, even unto sole of the foot, even unto the head. There is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. And we find in Jeremiah 8:11, it talks about those who have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Hey, we have a victory here. And putting Band-Aid a Band-Aid on gangrene. That's not how you treat gangrene. But let's just cover it up. Let's just try to make it look pretty. We don't need Band-Aids. We need the cure. We're living in a culture of great inequity in which even most Christians who are seeking to oppose the evil are doing so using inequity, not equal protection under the law. And inequity is iniquity. We must remember that God is a God of equity. In Psalm 98:9 it says, "Before the Lord, for he cometh to judge the earth, in righteousness shall he judge the world and the people with equity." God commands that we not support any perversion of justice and equity. In Exodus 23, verse 2, it says, "Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment." That's W-R-E-S-T. That is to wrestle away the protection under the law from a people. Don't join with those who are doing it, even if they're saying, but it's going to do some good. And so we're not to follow a multitude to do evil, even if that multitude is saying that they're against another evil. Then it goes on to say, "Neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause." If he's unjust, don't join in his cause just because you feel sorry for him. It goes on to say, "Thou shalt not wrest the judgment of thy poor in his cause." Don't say, "Hey, well, this is poor, so I'm going to take advantage of him because he is weaker, because he is more vulnerable." We're not to do that either. "Keep thou far from a false matter, and the innocent and the righteous slay thou not, for I will not justify the wicked." That's Exodus 23, verses 2 and 3, and 6 and 7. We should never be partial in dealing with people, especially in denying equal protection from murder by law because of their station, because of their financial status, based on their ethnicity, their age, their level of development, their present location, their state of dependency. And their ethnicity, or what they look, or whether they look like us or not yet. In other words, we are to live with equity. Jesus said, "Judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment." In John 7:24, "It displeases the judge of all the earth when men do not live according to truth, justice, and equity." You see, the problem, like it says in Isaiah 59, which I mentioned earlier, is that judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. It's not being brought into this situation. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. That was the problem in Isaiah 59:14. And in that same situation, the other problem was that none were calling for justice, nor any pleadeth for truth. And we find that there are calls today for leaders to be pro-life, to be more pro-life, to regulate more, to defund Planned Parenthood, which is merely just saying, don't make us pay for it. I am a man with a beard. If they made it by law and Supreme Court said, people with beards are not really people, so you can abort them if you want to. They don't really sound like that, but if they said that, I would not want all the citizens in America and the Christian church to rise up and say, well, you don't make us pay for it. Not with my money. I want them to say, that is murder. They are humans. You can't kill them. I don't believe that we should seek to defund Planned Parenthood. I think we should seek to defend the preborn. We should, instead of saying we're going to just make sure that they're not getting money, we need to protect the people they are murdering under the law. And so when we look at that problem, and it says that judgment is turned away backward, truth fallen in the streets, equity can't enter, and the other problem, no one's calling for justice, even the people who might be saying, well, we're going to do something, but they're not actually calling for equity. And it says, and the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. In Isaiah 59:15. In James, we find the following exhortation concerning treating people with inequity. In James 2:1-9, my brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. Talking about if you are treating people differently because of how they appear, are ye not then partial in yourselves, and are become judges of evil thoughts? If ye fulfill the royal law according to the Scriptures, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, ye do well. But if ye have respect of persons, ye commit sin, and are convinced of the law as transgressors. When we look and we see that the root of iniquity is in the scriptures as meaning perversity, to go your own way. It's the idea of following your own selfishness. And the Bible says, all we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Jesus Christ came to save us from our iniquity, choosing my way over God's. As Christians, we shouldn't go back to my way rather than what God says. If God says establish justice, and we say, well, we're going to actually just treat the preborn as if they're potential life, even if we don't say it, we'll say, well, they're lives, but we're going to try to protect these people first, we're going to leave these people till later. Then that's not going God's way, it's going our way. And God calls that iniquity. And that word iniquity can be used to describe that which is repulsive to society, like rape or slavery, or that iniquity might be respectable looking, such as cleaving to a false religion of works, or a system of morality, or a way to try to legislate incremental treatment of people to protect some and not protect the others. Iniquity can be ascribed to whenever someone departs from God's command in order to do that which is right in their own eyes. You see, even if we are feeling that we are doing some good, following the experts, being pragmatic, and it's over obeying God and trusting Him, it's unjust, and thus it is inequity. So regulating abortion, if we continue to just regulate abortion, it will never abolish it because it's treating it like health care. It's entrenching in the minds of the public that this is a right that they have. It's undermining what we say that we're believing, as the pro-life movement would say. And it won't affect abolition. But what if it could? Someone said, well, okay, but what if it could actually end it? It could actually stop because people stop doing it because it's just unattainable. The principal problem with the idea of regulating abortion until it's unattainable and thus non-existent because no one can afford to do it or no one wants to jump through all the hoops that the pro-life movement has made for them to go. The main problem with that is that it would still not be agreeing with God concerning the evil done to our neighbors. People would just not do it because it wasn't convenient, but not because it was murder. It would not be treating abortion like homicide. It would be treating abortion like health care that we don't really like. It would not be just, nor would it establish equity, for it would be not securing equal protection for the preborn as for the born who may be targeted for murder. It would not be treating them like people. It would just be saying, well, you can do it if you do all of these things, and someone says, I don't want to do that, all of those things. But it would not be treating them equally. And it would fail to be true repentance, the acknowledging of the wickedness of the holocaust of millions of image bearers of the Most High God and turning from that evil. It would not affect that. We need to treat abortion like what it is, the murder. It's sin. And we need to establish equity and justice, truth-telling and true treatment. We need to treat the preborn like who they are, our neighbors, human beings, in the earliest forms of their life, but human beings just as much as we are. We need to treat, number two, treat abortion like what it is, not like health care, but like murder. And then we need to treat Roe v. Wade like what it is. Let's take Roe v. Wade. We have to understand that people will often say that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, but it's not a law. Courts don't make laws. Legislative powers belong to the legislative branch. The Supreme Court has actually perverted justice in their opinion of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey and other decisions that they have made in relation to the murder of the preborn. They have violated both the U.S. Constitution and the higher law of God, who says, thou shalt do no murder. Abortion is not a right. There's no constitutional right for that. It's not a right, it is a wrong. When we take a look at the Supreme Court's decision, they have a problem with jurisdiction. A court does not have the authority to declare that murdering some humans is now okay. They don't have that jurisdiction. They have the jurisdiction to rule according to and to judge murder, but they don't have to say, oh, well, now it's okay to kill people. Because God is the author of life, and therefore only He has the jurisdiction to say when life should be taken away. And He has said, do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, nor the widow, neither shed innocent blood in this place. And so we find that they don't have the jurisdiction to change. They didn't create life. They don't have the jurisdiction to change, to say, okay, now it's all right to murder some innocent people. There's also the problem with partiality. To say that murdering humans is okay based on their ethnicity or age or size or level of development, where they happen to live at this moment, is evil. That's partial. That's not blind justice, which we are told is the symbol of a woman who's holding the scales and balancing things and has a sword and has a blindfold. That's not being blind in your justice, in your judgment, if you're saying, oh, well, how old are they? Okay, we can kill them. In many states today, in our justice system, if a man kills a pregnant woman, he can be charged with a double homicide because we all know the baby is a baby. It is only in abortion, when the woman pays a licensed killer to end her baby's life, that then the justice system says, well, that's not a baby. But does wantedness determine your humanity? The only two differences in those situations, that same woman with the same baby, the same age, can go into a place and pay someone to murder her child, and then it's not called murder because the justice system says, well, that's not a human. Why is it that double homicide but not a single homicide? The only difference is whether they were wanted or not. Wantedness does not make you human. If that's what makes you human, do not blame Hitler for killing Jews. He didn't want them. That's human rights hypocrisy. Then there's problems with arbitrariness. What if the Supreme Court said today that if you're 10 years old and younger, you can be aborted? Because you haven't gone through puberty yet. You're not fully developed as a human being. And so if you're dependent on your parents and you are living in their home, so it's your location, your state of dependency, and your age, and they say, well, if your parents want to abort you, they can. And they said that today. It would be the duty of every state, every governor, every legislative branch, to defy that and say, no, that is murder. We're not going to allow that here. And we're just going to ignore that ruling. That would be their duty, to protect the children in their jurisdiction. Pre-puberty and pre-birth, they are completely arbitrary. That's taking just an arbitrary point of a person's development and saying, yeah, that's where we'll not protect them anymore. And so we need to understand that's arbitrary. That's not based on fact. We know when the life begins, and anything after that is murder. We need to stand for justice. We need to be willing to say, no, we're not going to allow murder. I mean, our leaders, our magistrates need to understand that they need to stand up and say, no, we're not going to have a perversion of justice anymore. We didn't do that at Roe v. Wade in 1973. We didn't do that in other cases. We allowed it. But the Supreme Court is not the supreme being, as Wesley Thomas says. If we will not say no to them, then what have we made them? If we're not going to say no to them, we need to defy Roe, not deify Roe. And so we take a look and say, well, when we look at this and we say, well, what happens if the Roe v. Wade is reversed? And there's a lot of talk about that. Will Roe v. Wade be reversed? If Roe v. Wade is overruled, it will just put the question back to the states. Each state will then have that thing if it was overturned. And every state would continue to murder babies because every state has now laws that allow it. Because every state, most of those states have laws because they have pro-life laws that allow it in certain cases. As long as they keep following those pro-life laws, they can still murder babies. All of those pro-life laws would have to be repealed in order to abolish the evil in that state. And we want to stand and tell the truth. We want to do justly. Someone might ask, well, what if there was no pro-life legislative machine? We have all these lobbyists and organizations, and they're telling us to call our congressman or email this senator or do these things and push this, and it's going to save some. It's going to do some good. And they'd say if we didn't have a pro-life movement leading that in legislation, then what would happen then? We wouldn't have any protection at all for babies in the womb. They would all be killed. What would we have if we didn't have all these lawmakers and lobbyists pushing for such bills? Well, we might have what France and Germany and Russia and many other nations have. Those secular humanist governments only allow killing up to 12 weeks. Nearly every state in our union has them killed long past that. They are more efficient in regulating than the pro-life movement has. And so if we didn't have those countries do not have overt, outward speaking, conservative pro-life movements. If that is what they were going for, if regulation is the answer, then they're doing a better job than conservative America. What fools we are to think that we are really conservative in all our nation's laws and regulations. The preborn have actually more protection under those God-hating governments than in the most pro-life states in our land. If regulation is the key. So that's one question, one thing. But think about if there was no one who was saying, let's do all of these iniquitous things, then we might actually have Christians repenting of their apathy and their compromise and rising up to actually love their neighbors as themselves instead of trusting and paying someone else to do it for them. I'll just give money to this pro-life group and let them do it, and I'll just go about my own business. But to say, hey, each of us need to do what God calls us to do and not just trust someone else to do our job. We might have Christians going to the gates of death in droves to stand and plead for lives and warning the wicked and rescuing the weak. Because abortion mills across the country today are by and large operating with little or no Christians present on the sidewalks to plead for lives, to preach the gospel and provide assistance to those who will turn away. We might have droves of Christians repenting and engaging with our society, in the church assembly, in the public square, in Congress, and on social media, bringing the gospel into conflict with the culture of child sacrifice. Because they now have more time to do that because we're not spending all the time doing wrong. We might have a flood of voters swelling with a voice as strong as thunder, demanding that our magistrates end abortion, the abolition of human abortion. The Lord knows. But we need to do what is right. Duty is ours, results are God's. Abortion must be abolished.